Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world with self-care strategies from Chinese medicine. I'm your host, Brodie Welch, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Brodie Welch, a holistic transformation coach, licensed acupuncturist, board certified herbalist. And with me today is a fellow Chinese medicine geek and practitioner of all dimensions of this amazing mind, body, spirit medicine. I have Justin Ehrlich with me today, who is also a life and health coach that helps people cultivate and integrate their physical, emotional, and spiritual lives. He's been a longtime practitioner of classical Chinese medicine and a student of Taoism, so we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot in common. And having always believed the mystical practices of the ancients were relevant in the modern world, Justin has devoted his life to sharing just how practical they can be. To him, the ancients were the original biohackers. His mission is to help people heal their physical, emotional, and spiritual lives with practical methods drawn from both the ancients and modern research. He lives in San Diego with works with people from all over. Justin, welcome to A Healthy Curiosity.
Thank you so much for having me here, Brodie. I'm excited to join you today.
It's so much fun talking to other Chinese medicine people, and especially those, like we both have a lot of history and reverence for Jeffrey Yuan, one of our shared primary teachers.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's always good to geek out.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So what a lot of people may not know is that Chinese medicine, there's lots of different traditions within Chinese medicine. It's this practice, or it's this system of medicine that goes back thousands of years. And within it, and of course, like over time, over thousands of years, it hasn't remained constant. It's been shaped by the people have learned things, and the cultural context in which the medicine grew up. And it, like anything, or like any tradition, has been subject to much debate and evolution and like different takes on it. But a lot of the shaping of Chinese medicine that most people are familiar with is like in this century, where in an attempt to kind of modernize and make China look like not inferior to the West, Chinese medicine put this face on itself of being very rational and systematic and research-based and outcomes-driven and all this, which of course it can be and is. And at the same time, it also is this deeply spiritual mind, body, spirit integrated thing that over the years has, for example, Jeffrey Yuan passes down this tradition, this oral tradition from a Taoist perspective that goes back thousands of years, that somehow like evaded the censorship that a lot of the written text was subject to. And like a lot of the times that like people would politically fall out of favor with whoever was running China at the time. And that would be the form of medicine that was more in vogue. And so there's all these there's a multiplicity of traditions within Chinese medicine, and getting in touch with what this medicine can be at its deepest core is basically a system of personal evolution and the evolution of consciousness. So it's super exciting to talk to somebody who likes to go deep on this stuff and to practice it in a similar vein that I do.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's such a rich tradition, and obviously knowing the history of it, you know that they've dealt with really substantial diseases and epidemics and all those sorts of things, and yet hidden behind the scenes is this underlying philosophy that it's about the human experience in life as we interact with nature, and we interact, maybe more importantly, with ourselves, and learning to navigate that inner world.
So in Chinese medicine, it's not just slinging needles, right? There's these other dimensions of the medicine that include personal cultivation in the form of things like qigong and meditation. And also herbal medicine has been used for those same purposes. And that's what I'm hoping we dive deeply into today, because herbs and herbs for meditation, I'm not talking about things like psychedelics or, mind altering necessarily, like in the sense that we think of marijuana or mushrooms or like things like that. We're not talking about herbs that can certainly shift our consciousness in that kind of way. We're going to be talking about ways in which herbs move energy and can potentially open us up to helping us see the world differently in a more subtle ways. Because I know this is something that you've gone really deep into, Justin. So I'd love for you to get into a little bit about like what drew you to using herbs in this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge passion of mine. And part of it is just me being a mad scientist and wanting to experiment on myself and my own journey and constantly doing research around some of the older traditions. Having started in my journey in martial arts, I got introduced to the medicine via some of the physical lineaments, the physical injuries, the conditioning of the body, the internal teas to support that. And it opened me up to the idea that you could use herbal medicine not just for the sake of disease, but to make the body stronger, healthier. And there were teas or pills or ointments and things that you would use in very specific ways to help the body to evolve, to shift. And I think I kind of always approached the medicine, since I started that training before I went to acupuncture school. I kind of came into the experience with Chinese medicine already viewing it as not just a medicine, but also something that can be used for longevity and for evolution, if you will.
And what was that like?
My first experience was dealing with bruises and cracked rib and, those sorts of like painful things. But then I got exposed to like, make this tea and do your meditation, make this tea and do your training and see how it changes your training experience. Drink this tea for 90 days or, 100 days for transforming the Jing or those sorts of practices. And I began to realize that when you're taking a medicine at a dosage for an extended period of time, it has the capacity to really begin to sort of percolate in on a deeper level and affect us in much more powerful and yet also very subtle ways. And I kind of geeked out on it. I thought it was quite fascinating. And so then I would buy books on Taoist medicine and do research online, and I can read medical Chinese. I don't speak it, but I can read the characters. So I could go online and be looking at formulas and looking at texts and reading about formulas. And then, of course, I met Jeffrey and just found kind of, in a sense, a perfect teacher for that specific journey, because so much of what he shares is about personal cultivation.
I think that his stuff on personal cultivation is super inspiring, and I dive deep with his stuff on the extraordinary vessels for psycho-emotional change. And like, those are my most favorite treatments to do. Like this idea that different kinds of energy is in different kinds of channels in the body. So if we want to affect the level of programming of like the deepest level we have to go to the deepest channel system that we have. And this is the kind of thing where like, in acupuncture school, like most people get an hour or a day on the extraordinary vessels, and we don't think of them as having anything to do with how we operate and our deepest sources of programming. And so Jeffrey layers on, like in his teachings about herbs, it's not just these herbs move the qi, these herbs move the blood, these herbs transform the dampness, these herbs, like it's like everything has a physical function, but also a mental function, an emotional function, a psychic function, when we use it in perhaps a different dosage or perhaps a little differently. I know that like just with the herbal stuff, I know that there's a couple of formulas that you have come up with that you actually have for sale that are formulas that you've gotten to know quite well. And I'd like to just kind of like in a geeky way unpack the functions of these herbs and how they translate into how they work on the level of the mind and emotions.
Absolutely. And really the way that I understand it is like when we take an herbal formula, assuming the herbs have been processed in a fairly standardized way, and none of the more fancy alchemical preparation methods, but just a regular herbal tea. My understanding is that we take it at a higher dosage. You're sort of inviting the body into a physical response to the tea, where when you take it as a lower dosage, you're inviting the spirit to engage with the process, because it's a much more subtle energetic message versus a very strong physical message. And so the beauty of Chinese herbal medicine is that sometimes when a patient presents to us, what they're working with is really a manifesting on the physical plane. It's in their body, it's in their physical experience. And so we want to give them a higher dose to help them physically detox from stuff. But at a certain point, we have this philosophy that herbs can be used for cultivation. And so you move towards less and less of a dosage and more sort of personal responsibility for the person drinking the tea. And so the teas that I sell are based around that concept of sort of how can we take some essential oils and anoint the body and drink some tea and go into meditation, into reflection, into journaling, into a therapy session, and use the teas to help kind of provoke whatever it is we're looking for in the journey.
To make this a little bit more concrete for people, we think about it's sometimes easier to just like energy, that the physical layer of the body is the most dense, it's the most obvious, and so to affect it, we need like kind of the heftiest dose of herbs. And whereas like thoughts are more subtle, right?
Exactly.
They're harder to detect. They're less obvious. They're less physical. They're more perhaps refined, right? They're made from a physical energy. And really, food and herbs, there's a continuum. Basically, herbs are strong food and food are weak herbs. And so if we eat something that's let's just go with like a culinary food or spice that people are probably familiar with. When we eat something like cinnamon, right? Like we could feel a warming effect from that. And we might, like, if we feel into where we feel cinnamon in the body, we might feel like this deep down sort of warmth, right? We might feel this deep sense of nourishment, whereas it might be very different to take an herb like peppermint, where we feel like alert and peppy, and like we might talk a little faster, or we might, like that that peppermint is light and it moves upward and it's cooling, and we'll feel that effect. Like we'll be drawn to it more in the summer than in the winter, whereas we'll be drawn to cinnamon more in the winter. Of course, our imbalances may vary, but typically, just like we can sense a little bit of like, oh, that would feel good right now. That would enhance my experience in this way. And so, like when we're comfort eating, for example, I always like to get curious, like, are you having potato chips or are you having ice cream? Because those energetics are really different. If something's
Mm-hmm.
salty and light and crunchy, your body probably wants something that is energetically very different than wet and heavy and cold and sweet. And those are going to go to different organ systems and they're going to have different effects on the body. And so when we're thinking about teas, or when we're thinking about herbs that make a subtle suggestion to the mind, how can we think about some of those suggestions?
Well, some of it can be found in the sort of standard language of Chinese medicine. Because so much of the medicine is concept based rather than being limited to one concrete concept or whatever. It's a much broader concept. So you take an herb like in the three Shen formula, like danshen, salvia root, and it cools the blood and it invigorates the blood. And if you understand the idea of what the blood represents in Chinese medicine, then you can start to sort of extrapolate and understand what the herb would do on a physical level or what it would do on a psychosomatic level. And so you take that herb as an example that goes to the pericardium and the heart and the liver, and it cools the blood and it invigorates the blood. Then we know if the pericardium is in charge of imprinting memories into the blood, because the blood stores the memories and stores the emotions, carries the emotions. We know that it can be used to help calm a mind that is busy running a particular story over and over and over again. And so that particular formula that it's in is often very helpful for getting us out of that sort of repetitive or skipping record of the stories that run in our mind, and sort of reducing the intensity, or what Chinese medicine would call the heat, the agitation that comes with the story.
We can think about the pericardium as the heart protector. So it has this one-on-one relationship with the heart, and it tries to keep the heart, or the emperor, the heart's the emperor in Chinese medicine, safe. And a lot of times we learn at an early age what we need to do. We basically, like, if we think about our lives as a series of traumatic events that we basically need to unlearn or overcome in order to be in the moment, that we need to be constantly, the pericardium helps us express ourselves, it helps us relate to the world, but it also keeps the heart insulated from things that could potentially hurt it. And so it can serve to kind of block the heart's access to the world, and also keep us, as you just said, Justin, like spinning, sort of the keeping alive perhaps a survival strategy that's outdated. So if we got by like an early life dealing with our caregivers or our parents who wanted us to succeed, like we might have our pericardium telling us the story that if we're not successful in all endeavors at all times, that we're not safe, or we're not acceptable, we're not lovable, we're going to get kicked out of the tribe and die. So these kinds of things, it's like, it's subtle, but that sort of belief that's running the show in the background could be limiting us in all sorts of ways. Whereas if we were able to subtly suggest to the body, hey, like this is the past, this is a survival strategy. We're going to move the blood. We're going to move out this like domain, or the blood is the currency of emotion that contains the memories of the consciousness. We're going to get things moving so that you're not stuck in the same groove over and over again, that we could potentially make some traction when we're trying to like unplug from a limiting belief that way.
Exactly. And I think that, if we step out of Chinese medicine and into something like Zen or Vipassana or any sort of like mindfulness practice, where the suggestion is that when we are triggered, we want to sort of lean into the experience so that we can begin to extract ourselves from that pattern, whatever it happens to be. That leaning in process is, for any of us that have attempted it, know that it's not always very pleasant or very easy to do. And the reason that process of like slowing down with our triggers and being present with the wound or the trauma is so hard is because there's a lot of heat there. And that heat burns us as we confront, or we sit down to have the cup of tea with Mara when we see Mara in the language of Buddhism. There's a lot of heat there. So there's fear that comes out of it. And if we can reduce some of that heat in the blood, it makes the process of coming into presence with our history, our wounds, as you're describing it, makes it so much easier, makes it possible.
And that really is kind of what tea can feel like, right? It's sort of comforting, and like, and that it's there to make the process of looking deeply into the triggers, that which is provoking you, that which is causing you so much suffering, to make process of digesting that experience a little easier. It's like a digestive enzyme for your limiting beliefs and experiences.
Exactly. And we know from the perspective of Chinese medicine, on the more sort of physical medicine side, you can take danshen and use it for pericarditis or angina or some sort of like inflammatory cardiac disease. And you can use it for anxiety, acute, where there's a lot of heat in the blood. And you can use it at a low dosage for that sort of more subtle operating system of anxiety that is there because of the history that we all carry in our bodies. That's the beauty of Chinese medicine, that it can be such a broad spectrum depending on how we change the dosages. But it's all really just heat in the blood or heat in the pericardium.
I love that idea that in the classics, when it talks about, for example, the uses of this herb, danshen, that it's equally appropriate to use it on a physical level or on an emotional level or a psychological level. It's just in a question of dosage, and that it will do the same things on all three of those different planes. It just translates it differently. So it's clearing heat, whether that's actual inflammation or whether it is heat, that emotional agitation. It's the same language. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Exactly. It's really part of the beauty. And it's part of the challenge for us as practitioners, is to learn to open our mind into seeing ourselves, the world, our clients in this much broader picture, and not being stuck in, I use this for that. Danshen is for angina.
Right. Exactly.
Sure, it's for that. But, this formula, the 3-Shen, is inspired from a classical formula from Sun Miao, who is part of Jeffrey's tradition, and a very famous Chinese physician, as well as a Taoist. And if you look up information on the formula in modern times, it's all used for pericarditis and angina and all that sort of stuff. And most of the research that's out there is really all about sort of TCM-ish physical medicine side of the formula, but it's not where the formula comes from. It comes from a tradition of cultivation, of meditation.
And just to unpack that, TCM meaning traditional Chinese medicine, TCM as in codified by Mao, and therefore not having anything to do with the spiritual or emotional dimensions of life.
Exactly.
So it's all like basically like stripped to only the physical. And angina, pain in the heart, and pericarditis, inflammation of that which is surrounding the heart, essentially the pericardium. So yes, you'll look up and you'll see all these physical indications, but that's actually not at all the history of where this formula originated, because Sun Tzu Miao.
Yeah, and it's also not incorrect per se. The formula can be used for that, but it's sort of like you're only seeing one side of what the formula is capable of. And to use Chinese herbs for cultivation also requires a lot of participation on the part of the patient. We've got to sit down and do our work, journal, meditate, sit down and have that cup of tea with Mara, and hang out with those uncomfortable parts of what are there.
It's a really important point, right? Like that there is a level of personal responsibility that we can take. If Chinese medicine is a system of applied philosophy, then you can certainly go and have a practitioner move your qi for you with needles, or give you herbs to take, or recommend how to use food as medicine, or it's all these different layers. But there's also that ultimately you working at the level of changing your consciousness. That's ultimately where it's at, because if you can change that, everything else will follow suit.
Exactly. And so I often look at, when we look at like our herbs, we know that there are lower grade herbs and middle grade herbs and upper grade herbs, but there's also a way of using medicine that is sort of lower grade, middle grade, and upper grade, looking back at those historical methods, which is, when a patient first comes in and they're struggling, we're not going to necessarily jump them straight into the deep end of cultivation. We're going to
go home and meditate. I know you're miserable, but just go deal with this on your own. That would necessarily be the most compassionate approach.
Exactly. We're going to jump down in the mud with them, help them get some movement, do some acupuncture, give some herbs on a physical level, help the physical body process some of what's there, and then sort of begin to migrate towards the empowerment side of things. And so it's sort of like this journey as you come in wanting help, but hopefully the journey leads more towards the coaching side, which of course we both are big proponents of, because then it's really about empowerment and realizing we can change so much of the stuff ourselves.
Yes. And that really is the beauty. Well, that's definitely why I moved into coaching, is because so much of the time, people don't necessarily need to be reliant on anybody else but themselves in order to step into a full holistic healing. And being able to educate and empower and lead people there is so cool. It's so awesome. I love it.
It is. It really is. It's such magic. And if you've used it for yourself, as I know we both have, you see it, it. It's such a remarkable gift to share. And it's also work, and that's okay, but it's just such a remarkable gift.
Well, it's work, and we have these allies along the way. Like I think about an acupoint as an ally, right? In my coaching program, everybody gets, in addition to information on what we're working on, they get an acupoint of the week that is like a friend that we can rely on. So if we're trying to support sleep, maybe we hang out with Heart 7, or if we're trying to support digestion and nourishment, maybe everybody gets to know Stomach 36 a little bit better. So we can identify where this point lives on the body. We can get to know how it feels and what it feels like to work with it on ourselves. And we do that with the same intention. It also serves as a reminder of like, oh yeah, this is the theme of the week. And it's nourishment, not just on making sure I can digest my food, but it's nourishment on recognizing like what feeds me, what nourishes me as a human being, and where can I derive nutrition and value from my life experience.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really a beautiful way to help empower people and bring them into presence with their body and their mind, right? And so like my approach often is, here's some oils to apply to some acupuncture points.
Oh, I was just hoping you would go there. Let's talk about essential oils. Yeah.
And here's the tea, and then drink them and apply them and see what comes out of the closet, or what you're able to move through. But the way I understand essential oils, there's a huge tradition, and again, from the Taoist side or the martial arts side, the longevity side of making poultices and plasters that you might put over the belly button or over the low back to kind of strengthen the source chi. In martial arts, you would use topical herbs as ways to help harden the body or to open up channels. And essential oils are just sort of a modern rendition of that, because now we have access to things in a form that we didn't necessarily have access to historically. So I see, when we're doing acupuncture, you have the energetics of, say, stomach 36. And stomach 36 can tonify the chi, and stomach 36 can promote peristalsis and bowel movements and help purge cold from the bowels. And the way that we are able to differentiate whether we are needling it for purpose 1 or purpose 2 is via our needle technique and our intention. And each essential oil is basically like a form of a needle technique. It creates a certain movement. Like you were saying with cinnamon or peppermint, their energetic dynamic is substantially different. And so by creating the right blend of essential oils and then putting them on the right points, you're basically doing like a chemical acupuncture, where you have a specific type of message at very specific locations on the body to create a sort of sacred grid that then hopefully helps shift the energetic field on a physical level. But then you also have the smell, which goes in to affect the brain and affect the psyche as well.
And it's this beautiful synergy, because we can pair the energetics of the oil with the energetics of the points. I'm curious, like, if you could pick a theme that you often help your clients with, and maybe a point in an oil that you think about to help with that.
So I have 3 products on my site. One is for helping bring stuff out of the closet. One for is when it's out of the closet and you can't quite settle into being present with it. And the other is for when things are going well. And the one I probably use the most would be the one for when we know what our triggers are, but we can't quite break free from them. And that's the one that's based on Sun Tzu Miao's formula. And for that blend, it's 3 different oils. And it is the main one being Qinghao Artemisia, which is a yin deficiency heat treat parasites. It was one that was studied for malaria and those sorts of things. And so it's sort of helping us to work with the ghosts or the parasites of our past.
Does it have a liver affinity too?
It does. Liver, okay. Gallbladder. Yeah. And so I like to actually use that oil. It's in a blend with several other oils. I don't usually use them individually. Mm-hmm. But I like to use that blend particularly on like pericardium 6 and conception vessel 14 as 2 of the major points, because of how it helps to open the chest and clear some heat out of the heart and the pericardium, so that we begin to calm the mind and begin to let go of the sort of emotional parasites that are haunting us.
Beautiful. Yeah. Sun Tzu Miao, for those who are not Chinese medicine practitioners, came up with a whole series of what are called the ghost points. Those are really wild sort of possession protocols that's sort of the modern interpretation, but really it's kind of like that. It's the things that are haunting us, the things that we can't get over. And so there are memories
which are stored in the blood.
Yeah.
Which is, there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of agitation. There's a lot of heat. And so as we are able to sort of cool and purify the blood, if you will, we're able to clear some of the charge and the wounding around the area and clear out some of the toxic memories, so that those ghosts don't continue to haunt us as we try to go through and make new memories.
I loved when I was studying the use of essential oils, when I was studying with Jeffrey on essential oils for the low points and the divergent vessels, like mm-hmm. that, adding things like frankincense and myrrh to get that blood resonance, and like that, these are things that would be in used as herbs to promote the movement of qi and blood for traumatic injury, but that we could use it, like blend it into an essential oil mix when we want the body to understand that this is about recovery. It's about
Yeah,
old wounds, right? It's like
exactly.
sap from wounded trees,
Hmm.
right? And that there's this, anyway, just so many layers of resonance.
Yeah, and modern research backs up the benefits of what frankincense oil can do, or myrrh oil can do, and how it does actually help heal wounds is true. But it also is significantly more. And of course, there's
Yeah, that's only a piece of the truth.
yes, and it's like, okay, well then also, why was it one of the oils that the three wise men gave to Jesus? Why is it considered a holy oil, a sacred oil? There is more to some products than others. So it's a very powerful one. And the art of Chinese medicine, of course, is in how we blend it together, how
Yes.
we are able to create this sort of synergy where it's like we all sort of have, in the Chinese perspective, we all have split personalities or multiple personalities, because who I am when we're geeking out about Chinese medicine will be different than who I am when I'm teaching Kung Fu or when I am having dinner with my mom. And they're all different parts of me. It's not that a pathological multiple personality.
No, it's the social context and how you
Yeah.
show up.
And so by controlling who you put me in presence with will bring out certain parts of my personality. And it's the same with herbs. Like the art of creating an herbal formula is sort of like, oh, well, if we put these two herbs together, they're going to support each other, or they're going to balance each other out, keep each other in check. And that's sort of the art of writing an herbal formula or an essential oil formula, is how they all come together as a team.
I love thinking about it that way, that like our herb friends and our oil friends and our point friends, it's like, who do we want in our team in order to accomplish this particular goal for this particular person, right? So like the idea that somebody who needs to be nourished, who like we're gonna be combining oils that do that supportive, build the yin, build the yang, build the qi, whatever it is that needs to be supportive, really differently than somebody that just that has like a ton of energy and support already and just needs to break free into their potential, at which point we might do herbs that are more clearing or more like eliminating of what's in the person's energetic field. So something that might
Exactly.
transform dampness, or that, like would be clearing of heat, etc.
Yeah, you can look at like the three Shen formula as a way to clear out the excess when there's a deep, powerful charge to something, versus to treat anxiety, versus something like danger wand, settle the will, which is just tonics and has nothing to really clear heat from the heart per se, but it strengthens the kidneys so the person feels more secure in who they are, because the kidneys represent our self-identity, and helps treat anxiety by sort of making us feel more solid in ourselves, versus trying to take away the intensity of the triggers around us.
Yeah, really different strategies and one would be more appropriate for different individuals based on what we have going on.
And I think that's where, certainly from my perspective, and I can imagine you agree, it's where Chinese medicine really can offer such a depth of helping a person work through a chronic struggle in ways that are so much bigger than just this helps with anxiety, or that helps with depression, or this helps with whatever the symptom is. It's such a bigger concept that looks at the person and what they're experiencing, rather than the disease and just saying, well, all anxiety is the same.
Right, exactly. It's because of course it isn't. And
Yeah,
how is it showing up in this person, in this body? And how can we get to the root of that? Because it's going to be very likely that for some people it's going to have more to do with one organ system than another, and what happens as a result, like what what do we do in response to this feeling, that
exactly.
also is going to be different.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody reacts differently.
Do you have a story you could share about something that one of your clients perhaps has experienced as a result of working with one of your teas?
The biggest thing that I have seen consistently with using the three Shen as the example, and my usual advice to people, is to have them work with stuff for a month. And the reasoning behind that is that we're trying to work with the blood, which runs on sort of a monthly cycle, like the menstrual cycle. And so even though people will get a reaction usually quicker, I ask them to stick with it for a month. And so they'll drink the tea twice a day, put the oils on, for a month. And I can't think of a single person who hasn't had a pretty substantial breakthrough in terms of insight into where their trigger comes from and realizing that that pattern isn't them, that there was this capacity to disentangle the damp heat, to use the language of Chinese medicine, to realize, oh, that is from this event. That's not actually me.
Right, exactly. There's a difference. There's a
Mm-hmm.
difference between the imbalance that this event has caused and something that's innate in the person.
Exactly.
Dampness, by the way, being something that is like lingering and heavy and sticky and turbid that the body is harboring. It
Exactly.
tends to be hard to get rid of.
And then I like to use heat as the term charge. If it's a very
Yeah.
charged, there's a lot of heat to it.
There is indeed. Yes. Whereas like damp when combined with cold, it's more just kind of like a sluggish and a dullness and a numbness, I would think.
Yeah, exactly. And I have found really without fail, anybody who has sipped that tea twice a day for a month, there hasn't been a single person who has not really walked away with a substantial insight. And some of them have been more involved and done mind mapping and journaling, and others have just sat and been present with their own emotional experiences and just did their basic seated meditation, sit and breathe and be present with themselves. And it's shocking.
And yet not, right?
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
like, not to those of us who are in the know, but that's really a cool thing to be able to say.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. It's beautiful. And it's just nice to see this other side of what the medicine can be have an opportunity to speak for itself. Sort of like let the herbs and these historical formulas come out of the closet, if you will, and share some of their beauty with the world so that, we live in a time now where there is such emotional pain and disconnect and such a dependency on SSRIs and all that sort of stuff, that we need to bring back some of the sort of older methods to help people work through some of the stuff that's there.
If we think about the different layers of being that there are and how they interrelate, it's like, yes, you can use your minds to watch your mind, and you
Mm-hmm.
can use your body to affect your mind, right? You can change your inputs and change your level of mental clarity, your level of perceptiveness, your level of cloudy,
Mm-hmm.
your level of fiery. All of that can depend on the energetics of what you're putting into your body or your ability to process it. And you can use input to the body, like anointing yourself with oils or tapping into acupoints, to get unstuck around things, around the habituated patterns of the mind that we feel like are so ingrained in who we are,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be so frustrating to not be able to overcome in other ways. So there's a lot of ways to address, in my opinion, that it's like, yes, there's a time and a place for medication. And yet, like when you're really ready to deal with something and graduate from it, I don't know that you can without reckoning with it and without being with it.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think from the Taoist perspective, I certainly wouldn't dare to speak on behalf of Jeffrey, but I think he would agree that personal ownership is at the hallmark of the human journey. Self-identity is coming to know ourselves. And that means knowing ourselves in our good spaces and in our bad spaces and in our healthy times and in our sick times. And that true healing is about that knowledge, not about this specific result or that specific result.
Well, yeah, and I would agree. I would agree that that's probably in line with what something Jeffrey would say, because of the I'm reminded of like the Taoist story of why we incarnate to begin with. Right?
Exactly.
There's lessons that we need to learn, that where we're given a body and a circumstance, a timing and the right DNA genetics to learn a particular lesson. And we have this curriculum, which we have our choice. We have free will. So it's our choice whether or not we get to follow our curriculum, or that we choose to follow our curriculum or not. But anything that we haven't totally graduated from, if we haven't totally like learned and reckoned with and graduated, like moved on from, have it no longer have a charge or have it no longer be tying up our chi and blood, that's what becomes the seeds or the jing for our next incarnation. And that's what feeds, like, because the jing is stored in the kidneys, and the kidneys have a relationship to the brain. Like the brain is that repository of our life experience that is an interaction between both the consciousness and the essence. And so it's just like the dregs of like whatever's left is what we've got to deal with next time around.
Exactly. And so it's this ever evolving process of basically letting go. And I like to think of it as a sort of a dance. It's the letting go of the things that are no longer serving us, that really aren't part of us, and the reinforcing or the tonification of the parts that are our true self.
Yeah. Amplifying that,
Yeah.
transcending the rest. And then ultimately when we die, being able to go out the top of our head, like in the Buddhist iconography, like there's always that light above us that we get to move towards.
And basically those things we're letting go of are basically the old memories. And if you're Taoist or Buddhist, then maybe those are coming from a past life. And if we're not, then they can just be the traumas from this life. But we're sort of like, to use the sort of more religious language, you would say you're trying to exorcise the demons that haunt you, the memories that haunt you, so that you can return back to your true source and your connection to divinity.
Yes. It has been so much fun chatting with you, Justin, and hopefully giving people a little window of insight into the more deeper inner tradition of Chinese medicine that Master and Dr. Jeffrey Yuen has helped keep alive, and which we both have such respect for. So thanks for joining me today. If people want to stay in touch with you or get any of these awesome teas you've been talking about or work with you, where should they go?
They can find me on my website, which is just my name. It's JUSTINEHRLICH, JustinErlich.com. Probably the best place to find me. You can also find me on Facebook as well. And just reach out. Just reach out. It's been really a pleasure to be here, Brodie, and to geek out about the medicine and especially the very sacred teachings that Jeffrey continues to share with us.
Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening today. For more episodes of A Healthy Curiosity, you can visit the iTunes store. If you appreciated today's show, please leave us a review. This helps other people to find the podcast. You could also head to brodiewelch.com, where you can find free self-care resources, learn more about Chinese medicine, and let me know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, be good to yourself.